The void stares back at you, cold, infinite, unyielding. I have walked the corridors of ruined manufactorums, smelled the smoke of promethium fires choking the air, and heard the distant echoes of bolter fire bouncing through hollowed hives. And yet I have also glimpsed the impossible, a figure of unimaginable power, not forged by the Emperor, yet burning with fury that rivals a war god's wrath. Broly. If his wrath were to ignite within the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, what would remain of the Imperium, of Terra itself? Before we go any further, I need to be honest with you. Sometimes I look into this endless void, and I see that 99% of you wander these stories but never swear your allegiance. If you stand with me among these tales of war, faith, and fire, then subscribe. It means more than you know. It helps these chronicles of the Imperium reach others who still remember what humanity once was. And tell me, from which world, hive, or system do you watch? I always read your messages. It reminds me that even across the stars, the spirit of mankind still listens. The air on Valdder Secundus tasted of ash and iron. I remember that first breath, sharp in my lungs, carrying the scent of scorched servitors and the faint, acrid trace of promethium. It was not ordinary smoke from the refinery fires. This was heavier, charged, vibrating with a presence that did not belong. The skies above the lower hive swirled with unnatural green streaks, auroras that should never have existed in the upper atmosphere of an imperial world, and the vox grills of the Astra Militarum squawked with static-laden reports of tremors that defied logic. Reports came in fragmented, almost incoherent, structures collapsing under forces no known weapon could deliver, ground convulsing as though the planet itself recoiled, and yet nothing alive in sight. I was stationed on the edge of Hive Drax, one of the outermost sectors, where the manufactorums grind night and day to feed the mechanicum's ever-hungry appetite for promethium and ore. We expected orcs or worse, the whispers of a Necron tomb awakening, but not this. It was bigger than a Titan, taller than even the largest Skidara combat constructs, and its movements carried a rhythm that spoke of pure, unfettered strength. Broly. The name was barely known to us, a fragment from myth-laden Xeno's transmissions, scarcely intelligible in the Imperial lexicon, yet the impact of his arrival was absolute. Each step shattered reinforced walkways, sent debris cascading down shafts, and silenced the manufactorum's eternal grinding, as if the machinery itself recognized its own futility. The soldiers of the 144th Cadian Regiment tried to engage. We were ready for chemical attacks, ambushes, even demon incursions. But he moved through our law's fire like it was nothing, his aura, an unseen pressure, pressing down on every one of us. Some men whispered prayers to the Emperor, some muttered profanities under their breath. I do not blame them. To witness a being whose physicality dwarfed our comprehension was to stare at inevitability. The hive's lower sectors trembled, and every communication back to the command spire was distorted, interrupted, as if the planet itself sought to shield us from knowing the full horror. From my vantage atop the partially destroyed comms tower, I could see him more clearly than anyone. His skin shimmered green under the fractured sunlight that barely penetrated the ash-laden clouds. Muscle and fury interlaced into a form that seemed impossibly dense, and yet he moved with an animal grace that defied that bulk. I watched as he raised a single hand, and entire manufactorums toppled, like children's toys discarded by some unseen hand. Servitors tried to intervene, flamers igniting their fuel too late, gouts of fire washing over him only to dissipate as if meeting an invisible barrier. Rumors spread even faster than the destruction. Some whispered that he was a warp spawn, a fragment of a god of war from a forgotten dimension. Others, more practical in their terror, insisted he was a relic of a lost Xeno's experiment, a weapon whose creators had died eons ago. The Mechanicum's data slates were filled with speculative logs, contradictory readings, and a constant stream of recalibrated scans attempting to measure the impossible. And still, Broly moved. Step by step, a walking apocalypse, leaving scars on the world that would last millennia. I remember the first scream, not from a dying soldier, but from the ground itself, as if the very planet cried in protest. Houses collapsed, tunnels buckled, and the sound of twisted metal filled the air, overlaid by the distant, tremulous roar of the newcomer. The sky darkened, but not for nightfall. It darkened because the aura he carried sucked the light from the horizon, bending it into green reflections on every shard of glass and metal. The Imperial response was futile, and yet in that futility, something deep inside us stirred. Survival, stubborn and unbroken. That was the moment I knew the Imperium had met a force that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or contained by its traditional might. We could only watch, pray, and document. Every moment was precious, every detail a testament to the reality of what was now upon us. Broly was here, and his presence alone reshaped the very fabric of the planet. Even now, when I recall those first hours, I hear the hum of destroyed Vox grills, feel the tremor in the ground, smell the promethium-tainted ash. It was the beginning of a war we had no chance of winning, a confrontation whose consequences would ripple across the stars. And yet, somewhere in that despair, I sensed the raw, unfathomable scale of what lay ahead. The fires began before anyone truly understood what had happened. One moment the hive was smothered in the routine haze of industry, the eternal smoke of refineries and the clang of manufactorums, and the next, an explosion of green-tinted shockwaves tore through the lower sectors. The air screamed with heat, acrid fumes curling into every corridor, and Vox grills sputtered with panicked reports from soldiers and citizens alike. Civilians fled blindly, their boots scuffing ash-laden streets as chunks of masonry rained down, and through it all, the immense figure of Broly moved as if the world itself were pliable clay. The 144th Cadian, reinforced by Skidara units, attempted to engage him. Coordinated volleys of Law's fire, missile barrages, and even experimental plasma rounds meant to vaporize the toughest ceramite could not halt him. Each strike glanced off, each impact merely seeming to amuse him, or perhaps ignite the faintest spark of awareness that these creatures dared oppose him. Reports later described the aftermath as surreal. Walls splintered into impossibly sharp shards, servitors crushed beneath the force of mere steps, and the screams of those too slow to escape echoing against the metal and stone like a chorus of despair. I moved through the upper levels of Hive Drax, guided by the faint glow of emergency lights flickering through the choking smoke. From my vantage point, the inferno stretched across multiple sectors, a visual testament to the power now roaming our world. Promethium fires licked at the edges of collapsed manufactorums, igniting fuel stores and munitions in a chain reaction that made the ground quake beneath my boots. The smell of burnt hydraulic fluid mixed with scorched flesh and ozone, and somewhere, the Vox hailer of a panicked Arbite squad emitted a distorted, static-laden warning. It was the sound of organized society unraveling before an unstoppable force. The citizens huddled in whatever shelter they could find, praying to the Emperor or mumbling incoherent curses. Old women clutched data slates against their chests, children's faces streaked with soot and tears, and everywhere, the shadow of Broly moved like a predator through a forest of steel and smoke. Some said the roar of his voice could be heard through the hive's chimneys and ventilation shafts, a resonance that shook the very foundations of the sector and left even hardened soldiers clutching their helmets in instinctive fear. Mechanicum clerks and tech priests scrambled to activate emergency containment fields and security measures, though all the while, the pervasive sense of futility grew. Shields meant to contain local industrial explosions collapsed under his mere presence. Arcane sensors measured forces beyond their calibration, readings flickering wildly as if reality itself was buckling around him. And yet, amid the chaos, there was clarity. This was no ordinary invader. He did not seek conquest or plunder in any conventional sense. He was a storm given form, a living cataclysm, and every instinct screamed that survival, simply enduring to see another hour, was victory enough. I remember one squad of Skidarai attempting a pincer maneuver, only to be swept aside like ragdolls in a flood. Promethium and ceramite tore under the pressure, bodies twisted and machinery splintered. In the aftermath, I could see the outline of Broly's form silhouetted against the burning skyline, green aura shimmering, muscles tense and vibrating, as though he were attuned to some force beyond the comprehension of man or machine. Every step he took left impressions not just in the streets, but in the air itself, a palpable pressure that pressed against every lung, every heartbeat, every thought. As night fell, the fires persisted, refusing to dim under the dome of the lower hive. Smoke formed curtains that obscured entire city blocks, and the screams of civilians and soldiers alike became background to the hauntingly calm figure of Broly moving through them. Somewhere in the distance, a Vox grill sputtered a warning about orbital reinforcements, but even the promise of Titans or Space Marines felt hollow when faced with the immediacy of his destructive potential. Survival was no longer measured in strategy or discipline. It was measured in instinct, speed, and prayer. By the end of the night, the hive sectors closest to the manufactorums were unrecognizable, twisted ruins of metal, stone, and flame. Broly had passed through as a living hurricane, leaving devastation in a pattern too chaotic to predict, yet with a terrifying precision that suggested not mindless rage, but deliberate, incomprehensible power. I remember standing among the ruins, ash on my skin, smoke in my lungs, heart pounding, and realizing that nothing in the Imperium's history, no Orc Wag, no Necron awakening, could have prepared us for the magnitude of what had arrived. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, a spark of something else stirred: awe, fear, and the realization that the galaxy itself had shifted under a force we could barely begin to name. Dawn did not arrive with light. Only smoke and ash filtered weakly through shattered skylines, painting the hive in shades of gray and green, a muted testament to the night's carnage. Survivors moved like shadows among ruins, faces etched with disbelief and exhaustion, their eyes constantly scanning for the next tremor, the next step of the Colossus whose presence had become almost a living memory of fear. We spoke in whispers, if at all. Vox grills were dead, servitors malfunctioned from stress or damage, and even the persistent hum of refinery machinery seemed to pause in reverence or terror. Broly's passage had left an imprint that no tally of bodies, no repair of infrastructure could erase. I walked among the remains of the 144th Cadian Barracks, a space once filled with disciplined, regimented life. Cots lay overturned, personal belongings burned or scattered, and the stench of charred flesh mingled with the faint, metallic tang of promethium. Soldiers who had faced orcs, Tyranids, and even traitor legions, huddled in corners, their hands trembling as they recounted what they had seen. Their stories were fragments, untrustworthy in the precise sense, but consistent in terror. One step, one movement of the being could level entire blocks. And yet the fear was not total. Somewhere within those men remained the stubborn, grinding defiance of the human spirit, because the alternative, surrender to despair, was never an option in the Emperor's name. The Mechanicum dispatched teams to document the devastation. Tech priests recorded seismic vibrations, material disintegration, and energy traces left in the wake of Broly's passage. Even their calibrated instruments failed to capture the full scale. Data slates glitched, readings oscillated between infinity and zero, and fragments of the warp seemed to leak into the sensors, giving the impression that the very universe had fractured under his presence. Among them, some whispered prayers, cautious acknowledgments that the Emperor's guidance might not extend to beings like this. Yet they recorded, logged, and measured, because to understand was to survive, even if comprehension remained forever out of reach. Civilian survivors fared no better. Families emerged from shelters into streets of twisted metal and crumbled masonry. Children clung to their parents' legs, wide-eyed, mouths open in silent shock. The smell of burning husks of homes and the faint, residual energy from weapons discharges lingered in every alley. One old woman, clutching a scorched data slate, muttered fragments of prayers, her voice trembling as she traced the Imperial Aquila in the ash with her fingers. It was an instinctual response, human and fragile, attempting to impose order on chaos, faith on fear. Through the hive, rumors began to circulate. Broly was said to be an echo of a god of war, a warp spawn, a lost Xenos weapon, but none of it could be confirmed. The Inquisition intercepted fragments of data, analyzed them, and filed them under unverified phenomenon, cautious not to draw doctrine into speculation. Even among the most learned, the impossible had no proper classification. And yet, survivors insisted they had felt it, the pressure of inevitability, the aura that whispered power and wrath in ways no human mind could fully translate. By the second day, the echo of Broly's arrival extended beyond the hive. Reports reached neighboring sectors: tremors, unexplained energy discharges, and even orbital sensors noting anomalous gravitational distortions. The Imperium, vast as it was, began to feel the first stirrings of unease. High Command convened emergency councils, yet no tactical plan could fully address an entity who moved as Broly did, whose very presence reshaped physical and psychic space. The horror, like a slow tide, continued to spread. I remember walking through the central sector of the lower hive, past overturned transport skimmers and broken servo arms, the silence broken only by the faint creak of twisted steel. For the first time in my service, I understood that survival was more than endurance, it was acknowledgement. We had witnessed a force that could not be catalogued or controlled, and yet somewhere an ember of defiance burned. Though entire sectors had fallen to ruin, though the planet itself seemed scarred beyond hope, the survivors moved forward. Step by careful step, they rebuilt what they could, whispered prayers to the Emperor, and recorded what had been witnessed. In that way, the Imperium endured, even in the shadow of a power that seemed to defy comprehension. The echo of devastation was not only physical. It was psychological, spiritual, and moral. Every survivor carried it, a burden that would shape decisions, prayers, and strategies for generations. And far above, unseen by us but not unnoticed, Broly's form lingered in the periphery of planetary sensors, an indelible reminder that the galaxy had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same again. Rumors spread faster than any data slate could verify. In the quiet chambers of the Mechanicum, in the hidden alcoves of the Inquisition, in the shadowed corridors of Hive Drax, whispers spoke of Broly as if he were more than flesh and muscle. Some claimed he carried a fragment of the warp itself, a pulse of energy that bent reality in his wake. Others spoke of him as a relic of some long-forgotten Xenos experiment, the final echo of a race whose reach had spanned systems before humanity claimed the stars. And yet, these were only rumors, fragments filtered through fear and speculation, never confirmed, always suspect. Even the most loyal tech priests and inquisitors admitted to an unease that bordered on reverence. Observations trickled in, distorted by panic and distance. Instruments detected fluctuations in the psychic ether, readings that suggested a presence simultaneously corporeal and metaphysical. Servitors equipped with specialized sensors recorded waves of energy that defied classification, oscillating with frequency patterns too complex for human or machine to fully interpret. The Mechanicum theorized, recalibrated, and then theorized again, but each attempt to measure Broly's essence collapsed under the weight of what they could not understand. There were murmurs, cautious, hesitant. Perhaps he was a warp-born anomaly, a living nexus that bridged material and immaterial realms. Perhaps. The Inquisition treated these whispers with cautious interest. Rogue psychers, scavenged Xenos logs, and forbidden texts were cross-referenced in an attempt to place him within the known lexicon of anomalies. Nothing matched. No heretical precedent, no demon, no arcane relic could account for what the witnesses described. And yet, the more they tried to define him, the more ephemeral he became. Each psychic probe, each ritualized divination, seemed to pull at the edges of reality, only to reveal the faintest traces of a force that mocked comprehension. On the ground, the ordinary citizens and soldiers who survived the initial devastation spoke in fragments of what they felt rather than what they saw. The air seemed heavy with anticipation, charged with static that made hair stand on end. Shadows shifted unnaturally in corners, and some claimed to hear whispers in the dead channels of Vox grills, voices that spoke of power, hunger, and inevitability. None could say if these were hallucinations born of fear or genuine effects of the presence that Broly carried. Each account was layered with uncertainty, yet all shared a common thread. His arrival had altered the fabric of their reality, leaving impressions that could not be unseen. Even the planetary environment seemed affected. Local gravitational readings fluctuated, and the planet's crust shifted subtly, as though reacting to an unseen weight. Entire manufactorums, previously deemed stable, now required structural reinforcement simply to withstand residual tremors. Tech priests recorded these anomalies with grim determination, but each observation was punctuated with whispered prayers to the Omnissiah and cautionary liturgies to the Emperor. Nothing, not even sacred doctrine, seemed capable of categorically explaining the phenomenon. Speculation became a weapon of survival. Soldiers, civilians, and scholars alike constructed narratives to make sense of the incomprehensible. Some imagined Broly as a god of war incarnate, a living weapon of ancient Xenos design, or even a forgotten Primarch returned in an unrecognizable form. Yet each notion remained a rumor, a possibility framed in awe, never asserted as fact. The galaxy's understanding of the warp and the material realm wavered, revealing cracks in human comprehension where fear and fascination intertwined. In hushed chambers, the faithful prayed with renewed intensity. Clergy, psychers, and adepts of the Mechanicum intoned litanies designed to protect minds and souls from what they could not name. And even as these prayers wove through the smoke-choked corridors of the hive, the reality outside remained constant. Broly moved as he willed, and the warp seemed to tremble in response. Whether this tremor was causality or coincidence, blessing or curse, remained unknowable. The only certainty was that the universe, for the first time in millennia, had shifted beneath a force that belonged neither entirely to man nor machine. By the time the Adeptus Astartes began orbital deployment, the true scale of Broly's arrival had already become apparent. Hive Drax lay in ruin, its manufactorums reduced to skeletal frameworks of metal and ash, streets cracked like broken ceramic, and fires still licking at twisted debris. Titans were mobilized from neighboring systems, their colossal forms casting shadows that dwarfed even the tallest hive spires. Adeptus Custodes moved into defensive positions on Terra-adjacent outposts, ready to shield critical data slates, sacred reliquaries, and the Emperor's distant gaze from the ripple of devastation. The Imperium was responding in full, yet the dread remained. None could predict how a being like Broly could be contained, or even confronted. Commanders coordinated via encrypted Vox networks, issuing directives that balanced survival with offensive action. Every regiment, from the Cadian shock troops to Skidara cohorts, was assigned to precise grids designed to delay and disrupt the intruder's progress. Titans were stationed in staggered formations, ready to unleash volleys of macro cannons and plasma annihilators. Orbital bombardments were considered, though many advisors cautioned that collateral planetary destabilization could render Valdder Secundus uninhabitable. Every decision carried weight measured in lives, planetary stability, and the delicate balance of imperial authority. From my vantage on the command spire, I witnessed the first volleys. Titans fired macro cannons, the concussion blasts rocking the ground beneath my feet. Yet Broly moved with an almost instinctual foresight, sidestepping impacts that would have shattered a battle Titan, redirecting energy with a force that defied comprehension. Even Skidara units, those mechanical paragons of precision, found their firepower insufficient, their directives overwhelmed by a presence that refused categorization. Every failed engagement was meticulously logged, analyzed, and reconfigured, but the overwhelming truth remained: Broly was beyond conventional response. The Custodes, silent and unflinching, formed a protective barrier around critical sanctums. Their presence was a calm amidst chaos, ceremonial yet terrifying, each movement calculated to defend without hesitation. Yet even their discipline could not anticipate the scale of power they faced. Each strategic calculation, each deployment of firepower, met resistance not just of strength, but of sheer inevitability. Officers whispered among themselves, noting that no prior tactical scenario had prepared humanity for an entity whose existence bent conventional rules. Meanwhile, the Mechanicum worked feverishly to create containment measures, deploying energy nets, graviton traps, and experimental fields designed to restrain, slow, or disorient. These technologies, normally sufficient to contain rogue psychers or restrain Xenos, faltered. Arc lightning erupted in unpredictable patterns, energy readings spiked beyond containment thresholds, and servitors malfunctioned as if recognizing their futility. The air was thick with ozone and the faint hum of overloaded power conduits, punctuated by distant roars that made even hardened veterans flinch. And yet, amid the orchestrated chaos, morale endured. Commanders inspired by duty, soldiers sustained by ritual and prayer, and tech priests motivated by the Omnissiah's guidance refused to falter. Plans were restructured, formations recalculated, and contingency after contingency deployed. Each setback was cataloged, every tactical observation recorded for future engagement. The Imperium did what it always did. It adapted, it endured, it strategized against odds that should have been unsurvivable. By the end of the first cycle of engagement, the reality was unmistakable. Broly's power exceeded comprehension, but the Imperium had responded in full. Titans moved like mountains of judgment. Astartes squads executed orbital insertions with lethal precision, and Custodes fortified sanctums against the impossible. Every action, every plan, every prayer converged toward one truth. The galaxy had witnessed a force that could not be contained, yet the Imperium would not surrender. Survival, defiance, and resilience became the measures of victory, as the stage was set for the inevitable clash between unimaginable power and the unyielding machinery of humanity. The battle unfolded like a nightmare written in steel and flame. Across multiple systems, orbital bombardments shook planets, Titans stomped through cities like living mountains, and space marines descended from drop pods with a precision born of centuries of training. And yet, Broly moved through it all as though the entire theater of war were little more than a plaything, responding with an instinctual fury that was impossible to predict. Each impact of his fists sent shockwaves across battlefields, overturning tanks, shattering ceramite, and hurling soldiers through the air as though gravity itself had betrayed them. I watched from the upper gallery of a partially intact hive spire as one of the 5th Iron Hands chapters attempted to engage him. Bolter rounds struck him, detonations erupted at his feet, yet the space between fire and flesh seemed irrelevant. Every assault was met with a counterforce, subtle or catastrophic, as though Broly sensed every intention before it was fully realized. Titans tried to flank, their macro cannons booming in unison, and yet the ground quaked beneath his steps faster than any missile could strike. Soldiers whispered that it was like fighting a storm, immovable, unrelenting, and alive in ways they could neither define nor measure. The sensory assault was constant. Plasma beams scorched the air, flares from promethium fires illuminated twisted wreckage, and the acrid scent of burnt machinery mixed with the tang of blood. Vox grills relayed panicked commands that were often drowned out by the deep, resonant roars that shook walls and spires alike. Psychers in protective coils reported strange echoes in the warp, a tremor of energy that suggested Broly's very presence reverberated beyond the material plane. Inquisitorial observers recorded these phenomena cautiously, noting the impossibility of categorization, yet filing their reports meticulously. Even the most hardened veterans felt the weight of something primordial and unyielding, a force that defied centuries of combat doctrine. Skirmishes erupted across urban sprawls and wastelands alike. Entire squads of guardsmen were obliterated in seconds, yet the survivors adapted, moving in shadows, exploiting cover, and praying that strategy and discipline could hold against raw, unparalleled power. Space Marines coordinated with orbital artillery, seeking to create zones of controlled fire to divert, delay, or distract. Custodes engaged in ceremonial precision strikes, their every move calculated to minimize collateral damage while maximizing impact. Still, for all their preparation and valor, Broly remained beyond containment, a living apotheosis of force and fury. Rumors began to spread among the combatants, half-whispered tales that this was no ordinary being. Some speculated that fragments of the warp had been woven into his physiology. Others claimed he had survived wars in distant, forgotten galaxies and returned as a force of vengeance. The Mechanicum, cautious yet fascinated, logged every deviation from physical law with obsessive attention. Measurements of kinetic force, gravitational displacement, and energy discharge were recorded, yet none could fully reconcile the data. It was as though the universe itself bent to accommodate his presence, allowing destruction and motion to coexist without violating the known laws of physics. And yet, amid the devastation, moments of human defiance persisted. A squad of Skidara licked their wounds and returned fire with calculated efficiency. Guardsmen sacrificed themselves to draw his attention, buying precious time for civilians to evacuate. Even when Titans fell, their pilots emerged, shaken but alive, repairing their machines for another engagement. The clash was not only a demonstration of Broly's immense power, but also a testament to the unyielding determination of the Imperium's servants. Every explosion, every roar, every act of courage became part of the legend, a living chronicle of the night when a force beyond comprehension collided with the relentless machinery of humanity. As night fell across multiple sectors, the battlefield glowed with fire and ruin, green auroras from Broly's aura reflecting off shattered ceramite and scorched stone. The echoes of impact and psychic tremor lingered in the air, a haunting symphony of chaos and valor. Observers, both human and machine, recorded everything, knowing that history or myth was being forged before their eyes. And still in that chaos, one truth remained unbroken. Broly moved as he willed, unstoppable, and yet the Imperium would not yield. This was more than a battle. It was the intersection of legend and reality, a confrontation whose consequences would ripple across the stars for generations. The journey to Terra-adjacent sectors was less a march than a trial by inevitability. Reports of Broly's movements reached every command spire, each one more alarming than the last. Worlds that had survived Orc WAAGHs, Tyranid hive fleets, and chaos incursions now trembled at the approach of a single being whose scale defied comprehension. Strategic councils convened across orbiting bastions, titanic war machines were deployed in formation, and yet a pervasive unease lingered. Even the most seasoned commanders whispered that nothing in Imperial history had prepared them for this magnitude of threat. Terra itself, the heart of humanity, felt the tremor in subtle yet undeniable ways. Orbiting observatories recorded slight fluctuations in the astronomicon, as though the psychic beacon of the Emperor himself acknowledged an anomaly beyond precedent. Custodian Guard fortified the Golden Throne, while Archmagos of the Mechanicum recalibrated protective wards surrounding the Imperial Palace, reinforcing ceramite fields and ritualized energy conduits. Every liturgy, every prayer, Every act of vigilance carried the unspoken understanding that the coming confrontation could reshape not only a planet, but the faith and psyche of the Imperium itself. As Broly advanced through the outer sectors, cities and manufactorums cowered beneath his shadow. Titans advanced in coordinated lines, their weapons designed to crush the mightiest of foes, yet Broly's every step sent tremors that fractured foundations and shook even the most disciplined units to their core. Skidara formations attempted tactical flanking, utilizing gravitic distortions and field manipulators, but every maneuver revealed the futility of conventional strategy. His power was elemental, instinctual, and utterly unbound by the rules that governed even the most extreme constructs of imperial warfare. I observed the unfolding devastation from a high command vantage, the city below lit by the glow of conflagration and the flicker of failing energy shields. Vox reports described horrors in fragmented bursts, entire regiments displaced by single impacts, plasma discharges vaporized midair, and servitors caught in falling debris without warning. Civilians were evacuated in the tens of thousands, yet even the most fortified sanctuaries could not shield the psyche from witnessing such raw, unmitigated destruction. The Emperor's servants clutched sacred texts and data slates alike, seeking guidance in a scenario that had no precedent, no manual, and no guaranteed outcome. Rumors percolated through every surviving channel. Some whispered that Broly's presence was a test, a trial of faith orchestrated by the Emperor, or whispered from the unknown depths of the warp. Others spoke of him as a fragment of some cosmic predator, a being whose existence predated even the Imperium itself. The Mechanicum analyzed readings that suggested energy discharges beyond comprehension, gravitational anomalies that warped even orbital trajectories, and psychic tremors that distorted the Astronomican's beacon. Yet all of it was speculation, filtered through fear and awe. None could truly explain what they witnessed. Still, resistance persisted. Adeptus Custodes, serene and unyielding, engaged in precision strikes designed to delay and disorient rather than destroy, conserving their strength for when the moment demanded it. Titan legions, coordinated with orbital support, created overlapping fields of fire to channel Broly's movements into zones of controlled engagement. And even as buildings crumbled, manufactorums exploded, and streets split beneath tremors, soldiers and civilians alike continued to advance toward survival, defiance, and observation. Every action was both a gamble and a prayer, a testimony to the unyielding spirit of mankind in the face of impossible odds. By the cycle's end, the outer sectors of Terra-adjacent worlds were irrevocably scarred. Broly's presence left an indelible mark, not merely in physical devastation, but in the trembling hearts of those who served and worshipped. The Imperium had met something that tested faith, fortitude, and the very principles upon which it stood. And yet, even in the shadow of a being who seemed capable of toppling worlds, the human spirit endured. The stage was set for confrontation at a scale few had ever dared to imagine, and every breath taken, every prayer whispered, was a step toward the inevitable clash that would define history, or legend, forever. By now, rumors had hardened into something that resembled doctrine, though none dared call it truth. In hushed corridors of the Mechanicum and Inquisition, scholars and psychers debated whether Broly was simply a physical anomaly of unparalleled power or something closer to myth. The whispers framed him as apotheosis incarnate, a being whose strength rivaled that of the Primarchs themselves, yet there was always the caveat, perhaps, but we cannot be certain. No one could assert the nature of a being who moved through space and matter as though governed by a law beyond comprehension, whose presence left both machinery and human cognition reeling. Observers noted subtleties in his movements that defied expectation. When Broly struck, the air did not simply disperse, it pulsed, quivering with an almost sentient resistance. Explosions radiated outward, then bent around his form, energy dissipating with a precision that suggested instinctive calculation rather than intent. Space Marines reported that even their most disciplined formations seemed to falter against an invisible tide, their bolter fire misaligned by distortions they could neither see nor measure. Some priests suggested that the Emperor's will itself was observing, perhaps tolerating this phenomenon as a trial of faith, while others feared that it represented a cataclysm beyond even divine comprehension. Speculation extended to the warp. Psychers who attempted to sense or probe his essence described a presence simultaneously raw and controlled, chaotic yet unnervingly coherent. Some felt currents of power that whispered of ancient Xenos wars, the distant echoes of forgotten deities, and even the faint, terrifying resonance of the warp's immensity. Yet none could distinguish truth from perception. Each probe returned data both contradictory and compelling, and each practitioner emerged shaken, their minds left fragile from the impossibility of reconciling observation with doctrine. The Imperium's response adapted accordingly. Titans moved with greater caution, Space Marines coordinated strikes to channel rather than confront directly, and Adeptus Custodes reinforced protective wards around planetary centers. Yet every calculated action felt inadequate, a gesture against a force whose scale dwarfed even the greatest military machines. And still, humanity persevered, as it always had. The very act of organizing, observing, and resisting became an assertion of will, a defiance against the incomprehensible. Even when failure seemed inevitable, courage remained. Among the observers, philosophical and theological debates flourished. Some suggested Broly might be a test of faith, a living symbol that strength alone cannot define purpose. Others feared he was a cataclysmic warning, a force that the galaxy might never recover from, no matter how disciplined or devout. Canonical records remained silent, as they always did when confronted with the unexplainable. Only fragments of liturgies, hastily transcribed accounts, and scattered censor readings offered any record of his existence, and all of them were filtered through the trembling lens of mortal perception. By the end of the engagement cycle, the Imperium had endured, but not without cost. Entire sectors were scarred beyond repair, manufactorums rendered inoperative, and countless lives extinguished or displaced. Yet the very act of surviving, observing, and recording became a testament to human resilience. Broly's presence had forced an encounter with power that might never be fully understood, and the galaxy itself would carry the imprint of that confrontation across centuries. The line between apotheosis and cataclysm blurred, leaving only the certainty that a force of unimaginable magnitude now existed within the theater of human affairs, its true nature, and its ultimate purpose, forever uncertain. Faith, once as steady as the lattice of the hive spires, now trembled under the weight of Broly's presence. The clergy, psychers, and imperial priests who had devoted lifetimes to the Emperor's light found themselves confronted with a reality that shook the foundations of their certainty. Whispered prayers no longer brought clarity. Litanies recited in perfect cadence seemed to falter, absorbed by the strange energy that radiated from him. Even the most disciplined confessions carried undertones of doubt, a fragile human acknowledgement that perhaps the Emperor's will did not extend to all corners of existence, or at least not to this green colossus who moved with the inevitability of a star collapsing. Reports of tremors and destruction filtered through the archways of holy sanctuaries. Tech priests, usually unswayed by superstition, confessed unease as sensor readings fluctuated wildly, instruments unable to reconcile force, mass, and psychic resonance in coherent terms. One cleric of the Adeptus Ministorum, standing among the ashes of a collapsed manufactorum, wept as he traced the imperial aquila in soot, his hands trembling while he murmured prayers to the Emperor, the Omnissiah, and even distant saints whose intercessions he had never before considered necessary. Across the hive, the same pattern repeated, disbelief, awe, and tentative supplication interwoven into every act of survival. The Inquisition dispatched agents to assess the spiritual and theological consequences of Broly's arrival. They recorded fragmentary accounts of citizens claiming visions, whispers in dead vox channels, and dreams of immense cosmic entities. Canonically, none of this could be verified, and yet the psychological effects were undeniable. Soldiers recited prayers more fervently, psychers hesitated before tapping into the warp, and commanders sought counsel not only from strategy but from liturgical interpretation. The Imperium, for all its discipline and doctrine, had never faced a force that tested both belief and survival in equal measure. Even seasoned Space Marines reported unease. They were warriors trained to face the impossible, yet accounts of Broly's aura, the palpable pressure in the air, and the tremors of each movement unsettled the most disciplined minds. Chapters that had confronted demons, orcs, and Xenos war machines alike admitted to a subtle, persistent fear, the kind born not of imminent death, but of encountering something wholly incomprehensible. It was a fear that did not shatter courage, but forced introspection, a questioning of purpose and faith in the machinery of the Imperium and the protection of the Emperor. Civilian populations bore the brunt of spiritual and psychological strain. Families clung together in abandoned sectors, improvising shelters among the ruins. Children asked questions that could not be answered, adults whispered uncertain explanations, and survivors documented every moment with trembling hands, preserving fragments of reality for a future they could not be certain would exist. Prayers were uttered not for victory, but simply for the endurance of life, a supplication that humanity might witness another day under the shadow of a force that defied definition. By the cycle's end, faith had not been destroyed, but it had been reshaped. The Imperium endured, not because doubt was absent, but because human resilience had adapted, integrating fear into resolve and uncertainty into strategy. The echo of Broly's arrival reverberated through both body and soul, leaving fractures in certainty that would endure across generations. And in these fractures, the true test of humanity emerged, the capacity to maintain purpose, loyalty, and courage, even when confronted by an entity whose very existence questioned the limits of belief. By now, entire sectors of the Imperium bore the unmistakable imprint of Broly's passage. Hive cities lay in ruin, manufactorums twisted and molten, and orbital sensors reported disturbances that defied prior classification. The scale of destruction was staggering, yet the Imperium, vast and disciplined, did not collapse. Instead, it adapted, reinforcing sectors, reallocating regiments, and marshalling Titans and Astartes where they could still make a difference. Yet everywhere, the shadow of inevitability lingered, an understanding that no matter the number of armies deployed, no strategy devised, Broly's power exceeded comprehension. The strategic councils convened in haste. Lords Militant and Archmagos debated deployment and containment with a frantic urgency. Yet each plan, no matter how detailed, seemed to falter against the raw, elemental force they faced. Titans unleashed volleys designed to annihilate, only to see shockwaves deflected or dispersed with unerring precision. Bolters, lascannons, and plasma rifles struck with disciplined accuracy, yet his movements absorbed or redirected the impact, leaving devastation in patterns both chaotic and methodical. It was as if every engagement carried a lesson beyond destruction, an unspoken challenge that humanity could neither predict nor dominate. On the ground, survivors navigated a landscape reshaped into an alien topography of shattered stone, melted metal, and lingering energy distortions. Civilians and soldiers alike found themselves improvising shelters among ruins, relying on instinct as well as discipline. The scent of scorched promethium, the acrid tang of burnt flesh, and the metallic hum of broken servitors filled the air, a constant reminder of the scale of annihilation. Yet despite it all, humanity persisted. Even when despair threatened to overwhelm, individuals acted with deliberate courage, preserving lives, documenting events, and maintaining order where chaos sought to reign. Psychological strain ran deep. Clergy struggled to reconcile the Emperor's will with the incomprehensible force moving across their worlds. Soldiers whispered prayers between firefights, their faith tempered by fear and tempered further by the relentless rhythm of destruction. The Mechanicum recorded, measured, and analyzed, yet admitted in private councils that some phenomena could not be quantified, and still they persevered. Every recorded anomaly, every fragment of observation, became part of a chronicle that would define not only strategy, but the very understanding of what the Imperium faced. Even orbital command felt the strain. Sensor arrays picked up distortions not only on Valdder Secundus, but across neighboring systems, gravitational anomalies, unexplained energy fluctuations, and psychic tremors that reached even the farthest reaches of the Astronomicon. Broly's influence extended beyond immediate devastation, reshaping space and perception alike. The Imperium's response was a combination of awe, adaptation, and unyielding determination. Every Titan deployed, every regiment ordered, and every protective measure enacted was testament to human resilience confronting the unthinkable. By the end of this cycle of conflict, the Imperium remained standing, but it was irrevocably altered. Entire worlds scarred, psyches tested, and faith reshaped under the pressure of a force beyond comprehension. Broly had become not just a physical threat, but a catalyst, an entity whose passage revealed both the fragility and the extraordinary persistence of humanity. The shattered Imperium endured, but the echoes of what had transpired would reverberate across generations, reminding all who survived that even in the face of godlike power, the spirit of mankind persisted. The smoke had cleared, but the air still trembled with memory. Hive Drax and the surrounding sectors bore the scars of Broly's passage. streets split open, manufactorums twisted into molten skeletons, and countless lives extinguished in an instant. Yet humanity endured. Survivors emerged from shelters and ruined spires, their faces streaked with ash and soot, eyes haunted but unbroken. Even in the shadow of devastation, there was a recognition that witnessing such power and surviving was an act of defiance in itself. Reports from the Mechanicum were meticulous. Data slates logged energy fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, and seismic distortions with obsessive precision, but none could capture the essence of what had occurred. Psychers described residual tremors in the warp, echoes that suggested Broly's presence had left an imprint beyond mere material destruction. Rumors flourished among the survivors. Some claimed they had glimpsed fragments of other worlds in the green aurora of his aura, fleeting visions of places and conflicts beyond Imperial knowledge. Others whispered that he was a force of judgment, a living tempest that tested humanity's endurance, faith, and ingenuity. The Imperium itself reeled, adapting its doctrine in small, subtle ways. Tactical manuals were annotated with notes on unpredictability and extreme force. The Mechanicum devised contingencies for phenomena previously deemed impossible, and the Inquisition recorded testimonies to ensure no fragment of knowledge was lost. Still, Broly's nature remained a mystery. He was neither fully comprehended nor categorized. He existed in a space between legend and reality, a presence whose scale and impact transcended even the most extreme constructs of Imperial understanding. Yet amid uncertainty, the human spirit endured. Guardians rebuilt, soldiers trained with renewed vigilance, and survivors carried stories of courage, adaptation, and persistence. Families recounted the horrors and acts of bravery, ensuring that the memory of survival and of confrontation with an unfathomable force was preserved. In this way, Broly's legacy became more than destruction. It became a crucible of resilience, a reminder that even against the unimaginable, humanity persists, observes, and records. The warp itself seemed quieter after his departure, as though holding its breath in the aftermath. Shadows of his presence lingered in subtle tremors, echoes in psychic auras, and unexplained phenomena that would puzzle scholars for generations. The Imperium regarded these remnants with both caution and awe, aware that history had shifted in ways that could never fully be undone. Broly had come, reshaped worlds, challenged faith, and departed, leaving only the weight of memory and the testament of survival. In the end, the Green Tempest became legend, not simply as a destroyer, but as a force that illuminated the fragility, strength, and persistence of mankind. Across shattered streets, ruined manufactorums, and trembling survivors, a quiet acknowledgement settled. The galaxy had faced something beyond comprehension, and yet, even in the face of godlike might, the Imperium endured. And somewhere in that endurance lay the true legacy of Broly, not just in fire and ruin, but in the unyielding spirit that refused to break.